We were talking about these death cults, this specifically the death cult that is referred to very often by white people as Southern Pride. The reason why it's so easy to get people to go along with one of these cults, whether it was Nazism or emperor worship or ethnic cleansing, in Rwanda or in Yugoslavia or whatever, the reason it's, or, Mao's Great Leap Forward or Pol Pot's killing 2 million Cambodians, the reason it is possible to get people to go along with this is because there is a basic human instinct to say, me and mine first, right? If somebody in your family is attacked, you react very differently than somebody you don't know. And so there's this natural, and then, we go from family to clan, to tribe, to state, to nation, right? Essentially, there's actually an anthropological organization here. And what Hitler did so brilliantly, and Hirohito did so brilliantly, and on and on it goes. The same death cult was run in South Africa and Rhodesia under Ian Smith and W.P. Botha. What they did so brilliantly is they said, we are us and they are them. And we are better than them. And therefore they should be doing, they should be the slaves, essentially. And that mentality continues to exist in the United States. Here is Bill Doris. So this was from Nashville Public Radio. This is the guy on whose property is a statue of the founder of the KKK along Highway 65, just as you're driving into Nashville. And here's what he had to say about slavery. This is one of the modern spokesmen for this slice of the Republican electorate in the South. Here he is.
Slavery was the first form of Social Security. Stop and think about it a minute. It was a cradle to the grave proposition. They never had it so good as far as job security to begin with. It wasn't the best of job security, but it had benefits.
So, when slavery got outlawed, what did they do in the South? They started passing all kinds of laws that pretty much any black person could easily break, like you can't go on this street, or you can't look at these people, or you can't speak out this way, or, anti-profanity laws, all kinds of things. So that, and the modern day version of these, by the way, is the war on drugs. This is, Nixon brought this forward too. It was just a new form of Jim Crow. And Reagan put it on steroids. If you look at the number of people arrested in the war on drugs, particularly people of color, it explodes after 1981. But the whole thing was arrest them and then put them in work camps. And most of your Southern prisons throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries were work camps. Slave labor. And we're right back to slave labor. And, as recently as the 1980s, as Paul Krugman points out, half of Americans said interracial marriage is wrong. That would be presumably white Americans. In other words, this mentality that there's something profoundly different between white people and black people other than just the amount of pigment in their skin was not just alive and well, but was, the pervading meme. So the question, how do we get rid of these death cults? How did the Germans wake up from the death cult of Nazism? How does the occasional person wake up from these various religious cults that are so destructive? I'm sure some of the people at Jim Jones's Jonestown in the last minutes realized that they'd made a mistake, that they were part of a death cult. How is it that the Japanese woke up? My dad was in Japan for 2 years after the end of World War II, and we had a lot of conversations about this. And many of the Japanese were the emperor is the incarnation of God. There's still a lot of emperor worship that goes on in Japan, and it's sort of their version of our problem with people who still think slavery was a good thing. And the South wanting to have low wages and no unions and all this kind of stuff. And here's Bill O'Reilly saying, no, that's all in the past. Here he is.
Every country on the planet has racist elements within it.
What does that have to do with anything?
It has to do with it. You can't have a perfect world, Kirsten.
But it doesn't mean. Well, you're making two different arguments. I mean, is it we're racist and so is everybody else, or
no,
is that
we're not
everybody
racist.
else is racist, but we're not racist?
We don't have a system where racism is acceptable at all.
Well, no, it's not. It's not acceptable. But
Right. And that's why in the late 1970s. They passed a law to outlaw redlining by banks because banks were still doing it. And you know, we may no longer have de jure, you know, by at law racism, but de facto it's alive and well. Here's Monica Crowley on Fox suggesting that there's no institutional racism.
Are there individual racists in this country?
Of course.
Sadly, yes. Does institutional racism exist anymore? No, it does not.
It does, and it's called the Southern strategy of the Republican Party. This is not to say that all Republicans are racist, but not by a long shot. The Republican Party, just like the Democratic Party, is a coalition of a whole bunch of different groups. You've got some Republicans who are just Republicans because they want to outlaw abortion. You've got some Republicans who are just Republicans because they want to own 35 guns and they think that the Democrats are opposed to that. You got some Republicans who are just Republicans because they're rich and they know that the real agenda of the Republican Party is supporting the rich people. But there are a number of people, particularly in the South, and as Paul Krugman points out, this is why the South has been won over and over and over again for, basically since Reagan has gone solidly Republican, who are white racists. And, Bill O'Reilly essentially says, so what? Here, clip number 4.
The issue that I made a noise about that upset you so much is this idea that there's something crazy about talking about the fact that slavery was part of this country's history. That there are people out there that believe this, that we believe this. This is what happened.
So what?
Yeah, so what? Right. And then this is O'Reilly going off on it's only the lunatic fringe. Here it is.
Everybody does not acknowledge that.
Well, then you're talking about the lunatic fringe.
No, it's not the lunatic fringe. There are actually a lot of people in this country who are racist, and you just refused. I really have to wonder, like.
All right. I have to wonder about why you can't see what's happening because most Americans are not racist. They're not.
Really? So how many black friends do you have? How many black friends do you have?
If you think most Americans are racist, I'm ashamed of you.
I'm asking you a serious question.
I'm ashamed of you.
First of all, I didn't say most Americans were racist.
You just said it.
If I said that, I meant that we have racism in this country.
Every country has it.
And that if you don't have... What? How would that make it okay?
It's not okay. It's not endemic.
But I don't understand how that's an answer. Like, that every country has it?
You can't run public policy because there are fringe elements who are insane.
Right. So let's say if there's a fringe element that's insane, we're not going to do anything about them at all. ISIS. If there's a fringe element that's insane, we can't make public policy around that. Al-Qaeda. If there are fringe elements that are insane, we can't do anything about that. The Weather Underground. What'd she say? Oh, yeah. Voter fraud. Right. Yeah, no, we don't do public policy around this stuff. And meanwhile, over on Fox, a Fox News or a Fox Radio guy, a full-fledged cultural cleansing of the southern states is underway as lawmakers debate whether to remove Confederate flags and rename schools and parks that were originally named after Confederate war heroes. See, this is actually what needs to happen, is we need to acknowledge who these people actually were. The guy that this statue in Nashville, Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, there's this giant, 20, 30-foot statue to him on I-65 in Nashville that was made by James Earl Ray's lawyer, Jack Kershaw. This guy was not only a traitor to the United States, he was a war criminal. When a black brigade of Union soldiers surrendered to his army, instead of taking them as prisoners of war, he ordered them all slaughtered. The guy was a war criminal and a traitor. And we've got statues to him in state capitals. See, I think that we are at this moment where we are finally, and thank God, We are finally beginning to look at and reconcile our own history. We are beginning the process of deprogramming ourselves, which arguably began in 1865 and came to a screeching halt in the 1870s when Rutherford B. Hayes said, okay, you make me president, I'll take the Northern troops out of the South, and we will end Reconstruction. And it flipped immediately into Jim Crow, and we were an apartheid state from the 1870s right up until today, frankly. But by law, right up until 15, 20 years ago. So how do you deprogram? Well, as I said, defeating in battle is one way when it's an entire nation. And we defeated the South in battle. And that deprogramming began. And the South, and as I said, African Americans actually got elected to public office in the South in the 10 years after the end of the Civil War. But then Reconstruction ended. It takes a couple of generations for deprogramming to happen when it's happening at a national level. It took a couple of generations for Germans to look back and say, you know what my father did was reprehensible. What my grandfather did was reprehensible. For many Germans, they basically had to wait until their grandfather who fought in Hitler's army was dead to say that was reprehensible. It takes time, but it takes awareness, and that's what we're doing now, and it's a good thing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And once again, you want to fly the flag of the Confederacy? Cool. The Confederacy lost the Civil War. Their flag is a white flag. Fly it.